Picture this. It's 2 weeks before Christmas, and I've spent months saving for that dream family trip to Hawaii. Sun-soaked beaches, luau dinners, the whole postcard-perfect escape from our rainy Seattle winters. But then my sister Emily swoops in with her crocodile tears, whispering to our parents that she and her husband Tom need it more for their rough patch, and suddenly I'm the one left out in the cold, staring at my packed suitcase like a fool. With that betrayal lighting a fire in me, that would burn our family ties to the ground, one clever payback at a time, and now, with them all on their knees begging for mercy, I'm wondering if it's too late to care, especially as the holiday lights flicker on outside my window, mocking the warmth I thought we'd all share. You know how those holidays can sneak up on you when you're 42 and finally piecing your life back together after a divorce that left you questioning every choice you'd ever made, because I'd been looking forward to that Hawaii getaway like it was the reset button I desperately needed after showing endless overpriced houses to harried families in the drizzly Pacific Northwest, where the gray skies seem to seep into your bones and make every day feel like a negotiation with the weather itself. My parents had first floated the idea back in the summer, insisting it was high time we mended the fences that had frayed over years of everyone drifting into their own orbits, with Mom and Dad still clinging to their routines at the old mill even though retirement loomed like an uninvited guest, and I had jumped right in, funneling every spare commission check from my real estate closings into a savings jar labeled Paradise Fund. Because after Mark walked out for his perky yoga instructor, independence felt like the only luxury I could afford without strings attached. Emily, my younger sister by 4 years, and always the one who seemed to glide through life with that effortless charm that made you both envy and resent her, was initially all in too, chattering endlessly about how we'd finally recapture the sibling bonding we'd somehow missed amid our childhoods filled with double shifts for our parents and the constant hum of machinery that drowned out family dinners more often than not, while Tom, her husband of 8 years with his slick car salesman grin that could sell ice to Eskimos, even cracked jokes about teaching me to surf on those legendary waves, painting a picture of laughter and reconnection that felt almost too good to be true, like one of those Hallmark specials that tug at your heartstrings even as you roll your eyes at the predictability. But then, about a month before departure, the planning emails just stopped landing in my inbox, and at first I chalked it up to a technical glitch, perhaps Dad's ancient laptop finally giving up the ghost after years of loyal but glitchy service. Yet, when I finally mustered the courage to call Mom and confirm the flight details that I'd been mentally rehearsing for weeks, her voice shifted into that familiar hesitant tone, the one she used when she was about to deliver news she knew would sting. And she hemmed and hawed for what felt like an eternity before admitting that the trip had been scaled back to just 4 spots, hers, Dad's, Emily's, and Tom's, leaving me on the outside looking in. As if logistics alone could justify erasing my place in what was supposed to be our shared family milestone. "It's just practicalities, Sarah," she offered weakly, as though that single word could smooth over the jagged edges of exclusion, but the truth trickled out in reluctant bits. Emily had pulled her signature move, shedding those crocodile tears over the phone about how she and Tom were navigating a rough patch with fertility treatments that were draining not just their bank account but their spirits, insisting they needed this uninterrupted getaway to reconnect away from the everyday chaos, and apparently Mom had swallowed the story whole without a second thought, even though Emily hadn't breathed a word of any baby plans to me during our last coffee catch-up, where she'd been far more focused on bragging about their latest SUV upgrade that screamed excess rather than struggle. Fertility issues? It rang hollow coming from the sister who'd once borrowed my favorite prom dress without asking and returned it marred by punch stains and a careless attitude, yet our parents bought it completely, positioning me as the insensitive one for not bowing out gracefully, as if my own sacrifices, pouring heart and soul into rebuilding after divorce, meant nothing in the grand family equation. I remember sinking into the chair in my kitchen that evening, the one with the faded floral cushions that I'd picked out to make the space feel like mine alone, staring at the calendar on the wall where I'd marked off the days leading up to takeoff with silly palm tree stickers that now looked ridiculous in their optimism, and that familiar sting of being perpetually second best washed over me. The same ache I'd felt growing up when Emily snagged the shiny new bike while I pedaled around on rusty hand-me-downs, or when Dad lit up at barbecues recounting her middling high school escapades as if they were epic triumphs, all while my straight-A report cards gathered dust on the fridge. I'd clawed my way to this version of stability, turning a fledgling real estate side hustle into a thriving business that paid the mortgage on my cozy 3-bedroom without relying on anyone else's handouts. But apparently that self-made grit didn't register on the family scoreboard, where blood ties trumped everything, even basic fairness. The hurt simmered into something fiercer, a quiet rage that propelled me to grab my phone and fire off a group text to the family chain, demanding a straight answer about why I'd been ghosted from the plans, but the responses were deafening in their silence. Save for Emily's curt reply that popped up like a slap. "Sorry, sis. Space is really tight this time around. You'll get it when you start building a real family of your own," which landed like a gut punch, twisting the knife with its implication that my solo life was somehow lesser, invalid in the face of her supposed marital bliss. That night, as I scrolled through old photo albums on my laptop, lingering on images of us as wide-eyed kids building lopsided snowmen in the backyard during milder winters, I couldn't shake the nagging suspicion that there was more lurking beneath the surface, some unspoken reason for the sudden pivot that felt too calculated to be mere oversight, especially since Emily's message carried that edge of defensiveness, like she was guarding a secret she wasn't ready to share. The very next day, while I was out grabbing my usual latte at that quaint corner spot near Pike Place Market, where the air always smells of fresh coffee beans and sea salt, I spotted Dad in a nearby booth, hunched over his phone with his voice pitched low but carrying just enough for my ears to catch fragments as I pretended to fiddle with my order receipt. "No, Emily, Sarah can't know about the budget cuts just yet. She'd absolutely flip if she realized how tight things are," he murmured, his words slicing through the ambient chatter like a cold wind, and in that instant, my heart started pounding with a mix of confusion and betrayal, because budget cuts implied financial maneuvering that directly impacted the trip, perhaps even dipping into shared funds in ways that explained the rush to exclude me before I could question the math. I slipped out of the cafe before he could glance up and spot me, my mind racing through scenarios as I navigated the bustling sidewalks back to my car, piecing together that maybe Emily's rough patch wasn't just emotional, but involved real money troubles that our parents were quietly covering, turning what should have been a joyful escape into a covert bailout operation. That revelation fueled the fire when I got home, and over a glass of inexpensive Merlot that warmed my veins just enough to blunt the edges, I crafted a subtle post on Facebook, a snapshot of my neatly packed suitcase sitting forlornly by the door, captioned with "All set for paradise, but it looks like this holiday adventure is a solo flight after all, family first, or so they say," which was laced with just enough irony to hint at the snub without naming names, and as the likes and sympathetic comments rolled in from my network of friends and clients, the real satisfaction came from Emily's hasty response in the thread, a flurry of heart emojis and platitudes about finding my own adventure, her transparency as fake as a department store Santa. It was a small act of retaliation, witty in its public subtlety and satisfying in the way it forced her to squirm without me lifting a finger beyond a keyboard click, yet as the notifications kept buzzing with her obvious attempts at damage control, I couldn't help but wonder how deep this tangled web truly went, especially with Dad's overheard words echoing like a warning shot. What other secrets were they burying under the tropical veneer of that ill-fated trip? And how much further would I need to push to uncover the full picture before Christmas unraveled us all? Waking up to the pale morning light filtering through my bedroom curtains the day after that Facebook post, I braced myself for an onslaught of apologies, or at least some semblance of accountability from the family that had so casually sidelined me. But what greeted me instead was a digital barrage of passive-aggressive emails from Mom, each one forwarded with links to recipes for solitary holiday meals that screamed independence, while subtly implying I should just get over it, alongside inspirational articles about releasing grudges that felt like veiled accusations aimed squarely at my growing resentment, all of which only deepened the sense of being gaslight into doubting my own rightful anger over the Hawaii exclusion. It was the kind of deflection tactic she'd perfected over decades, the one that always left you second-guessing whether you were the unreasonable party for demanding something as basic as fairness in a family trip that I'd contributed to both financially and emotionally. And by the time I'd skimmed through the third such message while nursing my coffee at the kitchen island, I decided it was time to cut through the noise by calling Dad directly, figuring his straightforward millworker bluntness might finally reveal the truth behind those budget cuts I'd overheard at the cafe, though his voice on the other end came out gruff and evasive, dodging my pointed questions with mumbles about Emily's delicate situation and how the Hawaii escape was meant to patch up whatever cracks were forming in her marriage to Tom, as if her supposed fragility excused rewriting the entire itinerary to erase my presence without so much as a conversation. Delicate situation, he kept repeating like a broken record, but the sister I'd known since we were kids sharing a bedroom full of secrets and stuffed animals didn't strike me as someone who crumbled under pressure. Especially not the Emily who'd once talked her way out of a speeding ticket with nothing but charm and a batting of her eyelashes, and as Dad rambled on without offering any real answers, I felt that familiar frustration bubbling up. The same one that had simmered during our childhood when he'd praise her minor achievements while overlooking my consistent efforts to keep the family afloat during tough times, prompting me to press harder until he sighed and hung up with a promise to talk later that rang as hollow as an empty promise of holiday cheer. Frustrated but undeterred, I turned to the digital breadcrumbs left behind in a forgotten family email chain that I'd managed to access through an old shared folder from our planning days. And what I uncovered there painted a picture far grimmer than mere sibling rivalry, revealing that Emily and Tom were neck-deep in credit card debt from his ill-fated foray into cryptocurrency trading that had tanked spectacularly over the past year, turning their so-called rough patch into a financial sinkhole that threatened to drag down anyone close enough to lend a hand, and it hit me like a splash of cold water that the Hawaii trip had morphed into their elaborate escape hatch, partially funded by Mom and Dad dipping into their hard-earned retirement savings without a whisper of transparency to the rest of us. No wonder they'd been so eager to exclude me from the loop. As the one with a stable business and no dramatic entanglements, I'd have spotted the red flags from a mile away and called out. The foolishness of bankrolling a vacation to bail out Tom's get-rich-quick schemes, much like I'd warned Emily years ago against co-signing his first big car loan that ended up biting them both, yet here they were, treating the family pot like an endless well while positioning me as the outsider who didn't need to worry her pretty head about it. The audacity of it all coiled tight in my chest, transforming hurt into a strategic kind of fury that had me pacing the living room with its view of the evergreen-dotted neighborhood already twinkling with early holiday lights. And just as I was mapping out my next verbal salvo, the doorbell rang with an insistent chime that shattered the quiet, revealing Emily and Tom on my doorstep, uninvited and unapologetic, lugging suitcases as if my home were a convenient pit stop in their road to paradise. They breezed past me with forced smiles and a bottle of mid-range wine thrust forward as a supposed peace offering, Emily declaring they were in town for some pre-Christmas shopping and figured they'd crash for a night or two to catch up, while Tom flashed that salesman grin that always seemed a tad too polished, like he was pitching a lemon as a luxury sedan, and before I could protest, they were settling into my space, transforming the living room I'd carefully curated with thrift store finds and personal touches into their temporary headquarters, spreading out trip itineraries across the coffee table and launching into gushing descriptions of Waikiki spa treatments that made my stomach turn with their oblivious entitlement. My 3-bedroom house, bought with the proceeds of my first big real estate sale after the divorce and renovated bit by bit to reflect the independent woman I'd become, suddenly felt violated by their presence, yet I played the reluctant host at first. offering lukewarm hospitality while biting back the torrent of questions burning on my tongue. But as the afternoon stretched into evening with them lounging like they owned the place, Emily dominating the conversation with tales of their marital stresses and Tom eyeing my well-stocked liquor cabinet with barely concealed interest, the resentment finally overflowed during dinner when I set down a homemade lasagna steaming with cheese and sauce, its aroma filling the air as a deliberate contrast to their freeloading vibe. "So, let's talk about Hawaii," I said evenly, sliding into my seat at the head of the table that I'd refinished myself last spring. "And maybe explain why I'm suddenly the family member who doesn't rate an invitation after contributing my fair share from the start," which prompted Emily's face to crumple into that well-rehearsed pout she'd mastered in our teens, spinning a yarn about Tom's recent job loss that she claimed had blindsided them just months ago, a detail conveniently omitted from all prior communications, and one that explained the mounting debts, but did little to justify the web of lies they'd spun to secure their spots at my expense. As the meal dragged on with their excuses hanging heavy in the air like overcooked pasta, I excused myself under the pretense of checking work emails and retreated to my home office, where the glow of my computer screen illuminated stacks of client files and the faint scent of vanilla candle from earlier, allowing me to dig deeper into the mess they'd created. And a quick online search using Tom's full name pulled up public records of liens against their suburban home, the kind that scream reckless investments and mounting interest rates, confirming that Emily had indeed played our parents like a fiddle, convincing them I was too buried in my career to notice the shortfall while quietly rerouting funds meant for a shared family experience into her personal safety net. The sheer nerve of hosting these very architects of my exclusion in the sanctuary I'd built from scratch fueled a spark of dark humor as my defense mechanism, leading me to reemerge with a sly suggestion that they practice their luau dances right there in my backyard under the string lights I'd hung for my own quiet evenings, only to follow it up with what I framed as an accidental booking error on my calendar app, reserving them spots on a whale-watching tour for the completely wrong date during their precious trip, complete with a confirmation email that I discovered too late to cancel without fees, and watching Tom's face contort in confusion as he checked his phone was pure, unadulterated satisfaction, like catching a fox in the henhouse with feathers still on its beak, a witty piece of revenge that stung without drawing blood, but clearly rattled their smug assurance. It was the kind of petty payback that felt empowering in the moment, a small reclaiming of control amid the chaos they'd wrought, yet it only lit the fuse for what was coming next, as the evening wound down with them retiring to the guest room under the guise of gratitude. The true breaking point erupted 2 days later amid the first flurries of snow dusting the evergreens outside my window, turning the world into a hushed winter wonderland that mocked the storm brewing inside my home. When Mom's call came through while Emily and Tom napped off the previous night's delivery pizza, her voice thick with that signature guilt-tripping lilt as she implored me to step up and host the entire family for Christmas Eve, citing Emily's insistence that my spacious place with its open layout and proximity to the city lights made it ideal for a full gathering where we could hash out the Hawaii mess over eggnog and forgiveness. Host them all after the betrayal that had left me packing away my dreams in a dusty closet? I let out a sharp laugh that echoed off the kitchen tiles, the sound more bitter than mirthful, and laid it out plain, explaining how their blatant favoritism had carved a wound too deep for superficial holiday platitudes, but she countered with accusations of selfishness, painting me as the barrier to family unity while conveniently ignoring the role her enabling had played in the exclusion drama. In the midst of the escalating argument, Emily stirred awake and snatched the phone to mediate with her soothing tones, but that's when she let the mask slip just a fraction, murmuring something about how it wasn't like I truly needed the trip anyway, since I was managing so well on my own, a dismissive jab that ignited the powder keg, reminding me of all the times I'd shouldered the emotional load for this family without reciprocity, from covering unexpected bills during Dad's layoffs to being the steady one after my own marital implosion. I ended the call abruptly, my thumb slamming the block button on their numbers with a finality that sent a rush of adrenaline through me, and as the sudden silence enveloped the house broken only by the soft patter of snow against the panes, a twisted sense of satisfaction settled in, the first real taste of boundaries asserted after years of being the doormat, but that peace shattered moments later when my phone vibrated with a text from Aunt Linda, our family's unofficial keeper of secrets and the one relative who always seemed to know more than she let on, reading simply, "Heard the holiday drama is exploding. Emily let slip something about Dad's will during coffee today. You might want to call me before it all blows up further," which sent my stomach plummeting into icy depths. Because a will implied stakes far beyond a vacation, hinting at inheritances and divisions that could explain the desperate maneuvering around the trip, and as the snow thickened outside, blanketing the world in white, I realized that blocking their calls was merely the opening salvo in a war that was only just beginning to reveal its deeper, more treacherous layers. With Emily and Tom still entrenched in my guest room like squatters claiming territory in a home that I'd fought tooth and nail to make my own after the divorce stripped away so much of what I thought was stable, the act of blocking my parents' numbers delivered a fleeting illusion of peace that wrapped around me like a thin blanket on a freezing night, allowing me to reclaim some semblance of control over the space where memories of quiet evenings with a good book and a glass of wine had been my sanctuary. Yet that fragile calm evaporated by the next morning when the relentless Seattle snow had escalated into a full-throated blizzard, blanketing the neighborhood in a heavy white shroud that muffled the outside world and amplified every creak and whisper within my walls, turning what should have been a cozy retreat into a pressure cooker of unresolved tensions that had me brewing coffee strong enough to jolt awake the deepest regrets while they slumbered obliviously upstairs. I stood at the kitchen window watching the flakes swirl in chaotic patterns against the evergreens that lined my backyard, their branches bowing under the weight much like I felt my patience bending under the intrusion of family members who'd orchestrated my exclusion from the Hawaii trip with such calculated indifference, and as steam rose from my mug carrying the rich, grounding aroma that usually centered me, I began mentally mapping out the confrontation that could no longer be delayed, drawing on the strength I'd cultivated through years of solo house showings and late-night contract reviews that had built this life brick by metaphorical brick, because Aunt Linda's cryptic text about Dad's will lingered like a shadow, suggesting layers of financial maneuvering that tied the vacation snub to something far more personal and potentially divisive than mere holiday logistics. The suspicion that Emily's pleas for the trip weren't just about romance or reconnection, but perhaps a ploy to secure advantages in whatever inheritance drama was unfolding made my resolve harden, transforming the hurt of betrayal into a focused determination to evict the chaos from my doorstep before it consumed the holiday season entirely. And with that clarity, I set down my coffee and headed upstairs, the wooden steps creaking underfoot as a prelude to the storm I was about to unleash within these walls. They stirred as I knocked sharply on the guest room door, Emily emerging first in her rumpled robe with hair tousled from sleep and a bleary-eyed confusion that quickly sharpened into annoyance when she registered my expression, while Tom trailed behind rubbing his stubble and muttering about the cold seeping through the windows, both of them demanding breakfast as if this were a complimentary hotel stay rather than an imposition on a sister and her hard-earned home, and I met their expectations with a spread of toast and eggs prepared efficiently but without warmth, using the mundane task to steel myself for the words I'd rehearsed in the mirror that morning, words that carried the weight of boundaries long overdue. As we gathered around the dining table with its scarred oak surface holding stories of my post-divorce rebirth through countless meals eaten alone yet purposefully, I laid it out without preamble, informing them in a voice steady as the falling snow outside that they needed to pack their things and leave immediately today because my house was no longer available as a free crash pad for those who deemed me unworthy of sharing paradise, and Emily's eyes widened in disbelief, her pout morphing into outright outrage as she protested the timing with the blizzard raging, insisting that family obligations trumped such callousness, especially when they were supposedly navigating hardships that justified every lie and omission in the trip planning. Tom jumped in with his polished salesman patter, offering to contribute to groceries or utilities as if a few bucks could erase the sting of exclusion, but I saw the calculation in his eyes. The stalling tactic of someone used to talking his way out of corners, and it only fueled my fire, leading me to produce printed eviction notices I'd whipped up from an online template the night before, handing them over with a wry twist of humor that masked the underlying steel, joking that this was their 5-minute aloha warning to hit the road before the snow made it impossible, their faces draining of color like punctured balloons at a party gone sour, a satisfying visual of discomfort that hinted at the clever payback unfolding right there in my living room. The scene devolved into a flurry of arguments and half-packed bags, with Emily clutching her phone as if it could summon parental intervention and Tom hauling suitcases down the stairs with grumbled complaints about the weather, but I held firm at the door. Watching as they bundled into their rental car amid swirling gusts, the wipers battling the accumulation on the windshield while I waved from the warmth inside, feeling a rush of empowerment wash over me like the first clear breath after holding it too long, though as their taillights faded into the whiteout, a flicker of unease stirred in my chest, wondering if tossing them out into the storm crossed a line into cruelty that even their betrayal didn't warrant, especially with the holiday spirit supposedly calling for olive branches rather than closed doors. Word of the eviction rippled through our family network faster than the snow could pile up on the sidewalks, transforming my private stand into public fodder by the early afternoon when my work phone, which I'd kept unblocked for client emergencies, began vibrating incessantly with voicemails from distant cousins and even the nosy neighbor who'd caught a glimpse of the drama from her driveway, each message laced with varying degrees of judgment or sympathy that made me feel exposed under the harsh light of collective scrutiny. Aunt Linda reached out first among the close kin, her call coming through with that gossipy efficiency she'd honed over years of bridge club confessions and holiday potlucks, spilling details of how Emily had already painted me as the villainous ice queen who'd heartlessly ejected a pregnant family member into the elements, a bombshell twist that stopped me cold mid-sip of reheated coffee, because pregnancy hadn't crossed my radar in any of our prior conversations, and the accusation reeked of yet another manipulative fabrication designed to garner pity and pressure me into retreat. I responded to Linda with a laugh that didn't quite reach my eyes, dismissing it as Emily's flair for drama, but the seed of doubt took root nonetheless, prompting me to wonder if there was even a kernel of truth buried in the lie. Perhaps a miscarriage or hope she'd hidden to avoid burdening the family further, though the timing felt too convenient, too perfectly timed to amplify the backlash against my bold move, and as the calls kept coming, Mom's email arrived like a digital plea for mercy, detailing the hardships of the storm and begging for reconsideration in the name of blood ties that supposedly ran thicker than any blizzard. Dad followed with a terse text that carried his no-nonsense tone, reminding me that families stuck together through thick and thin, ignoring how his enabling had created the thin in the first place, and even Tom sent a LinkedIn connection request that screamed desperation, likely angling for job leads or sympathy in professional circles, all of which I largely ignored while curling up by the fireplace with its crackling logs casting dancing shadows on the walls, the isolation creeping in like the chill from the drafty corners despite the warmth, making me question if my witty eviction had reclaimed my peace or merely traded it for a deeper solitude amid the twinkling holiday displays on neighboring homes. The begging evolved into a more insidious form by evening, routed through mutual friends and acquaintances who showed up unbidden with olive branches that carried hidden barbs, like the pie from a shared book club member that turned out to be Emily's handwritten apology baked inside, filled with professions of sorrow and assurances that Hawaii was scrapped anyway due to the weather forecasts. A revelation that perked my interest because it suggested my social media nudge might have indirectly derailed their plans more than I'd imagined, planting seeds of vindication even as it complicated the narrative of victimhood they were spinning. Yet the true cliffhanger dropped into my lap via a forwarded email chain that Emily had accidentally CC'd me on in her haste to rally support from Mom, the subject line reading "Urgent Family Update," and the body revealing a snippet that chilled me to the core. "We have to keep Sarah in the dark about the will. it's not personal, but with the trip. Fallout, she can't find out before everything's finalized, or it'll ruin us all. A vague but loaded admission that tied the inheritance intrigue directly to the exclusion plot, hinting at stakes involving assets and divisions that could upend the family dynamic forever. My heart raced as I read and reread the words on my laptop screen in the dim glow of the living room lamp, the storm howling outside like an echo of the turmoil within. Because this wasn't just about a vacation anymore, but a calculated effort to marginalize me from decisions that affected my future, and as the snow continued its relentless assault, burying the world in uncertainty, I realized that kicking them out had been a satisfying act of revenge that restored my boundaries, but also cracked open a Pandora's box of secrets, leaving me teetering on the edge of discovery. What exactly was Emily so frantic to conceal about Dad's will, and how much further would the backlash push me before I uncovered the full, unforgiving truth lurking beneath the holiday facade? As the blizzard finally relented by midday the following day, unveiling a Seattle landscape sparkling under a deceptive blue sky that belied the emotional overcast still brooding inside my home, the eviction's aftermath lingered like the faint chill seeping through the windows despite the sun's tentative warmth, and though I'd reclaimed my space from Emily and Tom's unwelcome occupation, the flood of indirect pleas and judgments pouring through my unblocked work channels began to erode the satisfaction I'd felt watching their car disappear into the snow, transforming what had been a bold stand into an exhausting siege of secondhand guilt trips that tested the boundaries I'd so fiercely asserted. I'd strategically unblocked only a handful of numbers essential for my real estate dealings, where clients expected prompt replies amid the holiday slowdown. But that decision backfired spectacularly as my inbox and voicemail swelled with messages from cousins relaying Emily's tearful narratives of abandonment, and even the chatty neighbor who'd witnessed the bundled exit offering unsolicited advice on family reconciliation over shared fence-line gossip. Each communication laced with that subtle implication that I was the one unraveling the holiday tapestry we'd all woven in our minds since childhood, complete with visions of turkey dinners and gift exchanges that now felt tainted by the exclusion from Hawaii. The isolation amplified in the quiet aftermath, with the neighborhood alive in twinkling lights strung across porches and wreaths adorning doors that mocked my solitary routine of sipping tea by the window overlooking the pristine snow-covered lawns. And it was in that vulnerable moment that my appetite for further revenge stirred once more, a clever impulse born from the packages that arrived unexpectedly on my doorstep, holiday gifts from Mom addressed generically to the whole family, including the very freeloaders I'd ejected, their cheerful wrapping paper clashing with the undercurrent of manipulation it represented. Seizing the opportunity with a smirk that felt like reclaiming a sliver of power, I methodically repackaged the contents in my craft room surrounded by half-finished client vision boards and spools of ribbon, swapping Emily's luxurious spa set for Tom's monogrammed golf accessories to send to his old hunting buddy upstate, and redirecting his prized clubs to a women's book club I knew through community events, each mislabeling accompanied by an anonymous card bearing a playful "Enjoy the surprise switcheroo, ho ho ho," that infused the act with witty holiday mischief. And as I dropped the tampered parcels at the post office amid the bustle of last-minute shoppers, the imagined confusion on their end brought a genuine chuckle, a satisfying escalation of payback that turned their gifts into instruments of petty chaos without direct confrontation. Emily launched the next wave of begging by circumventing my blocks entirely, dialing from Tom's work line with a number I'd never saved, her voice cracking over the line in a blend of genuine tears and rehearsed accusations that pulled at the frayed edges of my resolve, demanding to know how I could have evicted them into such perilous weather when their lives were already teetering on the brink of collapse, positioning herself and Tom as the true victims in a narrative that conveniently glossed over the Hawaii betrayal and the debts they'd accrued through his risky ventures. Victims, she kept emphasizing, as if the duo who'd fabricated stories to steal my vacation spot while crashing my home uninvited deserved unbridled sympathy, and though I maintained a composed tone infused with dry humor, retorting that this was merely tough love akin to the time she'd borrowed my car keys in college without a return date, leaving me stranded for a weekend of errands. She countered with a revelation that twisted the knife deeper, admitting that Tom's job loss stemmed not just from market downturns, but from internal issues at the dealership involving discrepancies in sales records that bordered on unethical shortcuts. Details she'd hidden to protect the family image, but which now explained the frantic push for the Hawaii escape as a networking ploy to charm potential investors into overlooking his lapses. It landed like a punch to the gut, forcing me to confront the possibility that my upright parents, with their mill-honed work ethic, were unwittingly bankrolling not just a getaway, but a cover for potential scandal. Their favoritism toward Emily blinding them to the red flags waving in Tom's wake, and the begging intensified from there as Dad left a voicemail later that afternoon. His usually steady voice wavering with uncharacteristic emotion as he confessed, missing me more than words could capture, and floated the idea of discussing the inheritance sooner rather than later, now that the trip was off the table due to escalating costs and weather woes, a dangling carrot that hinted at the will's contents without revealing specifics, stirring my curiosity about how Emily's manipulations might have influenced those final decisions made in the shadow of Dad's undisclosed health concerns. Doubt began to infiltrate my armor as the days blurred toward Christmas, the calendar's relentless march marked by the soft glow of my tree's lights reflecting off the living room walls where family ornaments from our shared past hung like silent witnesses to better times. And I found myself lingering over childhood keepsakes that evoked memories of simpler gatherings before sibling rivalries and adult entanglements complicated everything, questioning whether my series of revenges, from the social media jab to the gift rerouting, were shielding me from loneliness or merely deepening the chasm I'd carved between myself and the people who'd shaped my world. Aunt Linda's earlier text about the will echoed in my mind during those quiet evenings, suggesting Dad had revised it after a prostate scare he'd minimized during our last visit, ostensibly to ensure stability for the grandchildren that Emily had always dangled as her future legacy, and the favoritism coded into those changes felt like yet another exclusion, mirroring the Hawaii snub in its quiet erosion of my place within the family structure, prompting an internal tug-of-war between the empowerment of standing firm and the ache of holiday solitude that no amount of witty retaliation could fully assuage. That internal conflict shattered into sharp focus when Mom and Dad appeared unannounced on my doorstep just as dusk painted the sky in hues of purple and gold, bearing bags of takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant down the block, the spicy aromas wafting invitingly as they stood there with faces lined by worry and that familiar parental blend of contrition laced with subtle coercion, Mom leading with an apology for the Hawaii fiasco that sounded sincere but incomplete, only for Dad to interrupt gruffly, announcing they'd abbreviated the trip plans entirely and urging me to join them at the old bungalow for the holidays, where we could sort through the mess over traditional fixings. The bungalow, cramped with Emily's cast-offs and echoing with echoes of past arguments, held no appeal after the betrayals, and I invited them in reluctantly, serving jasmine tea in my mismatched mugs while injecting sarcasm to keep the upper hand, quipping about how abbreviated seemed to be the family motto lately, from invitations to explanations, which elicited a strange chuckle from Dad, but only deepened Mom's pleading eyes as they unveiled fragments of the truth, admitting Emily's debts had spiraled worse than anticipated due to Tom's hidden gambling slips at local casinos that he'd masked as business entertainment, and the exclusion from Hawaii was framed as a misguided attempt to shield me from the fallout, preserving my stability while they navigated the crisis in isolation. Their visit stretched into an uncomfortable hour of half-truths and emotional appeals, with Mom's hand trembling slightly on her cup as she described the strain on their retirement funds, and Dad avoiding my gaze while muttering about blood being thicker than any storm. But as they departed with empty promises of Emily reaching out personally to make amends, the weight of their manipulation settled heavier, leaving me to ponder if their protectiveness was genuine or just another layer of enabling that perpetuated the cycle of favoritism, and it was in that reflective haze, phone in hand as I scrolled through the day's unanswered messages, that a photo pinged from an unknown sender. Capturing an aged envelope postmarked from a local estate attorney and boldly labeled Thompson Family Trust Amendments, accompanied by a terse note. Stumbled on this in Dad's desk drawer while helping with cleanup. It's tied to the will. And Emily's dead set against you seeing it before the holidays, which sent my pulse thundering as I enlarged the image on my screen, catching glimpses of my name etched alongside Emily's in faded ink, but with crucial details obscured by shadows and creases. The discovery hit like a thunderclap amid the encroaching Christmas Eve preparations visible through my windows, where neighbors exchanged waves and packages. Because this envelope represented not just financial stakes, but a potential rewriting of family legacies that could validate or shatter my suspicions about the exclusion's deeper motives. And as the begging from proxies grew more frantic with voicemails promising therapy sessions and repayment plans, my curiosity morphed into a steely resolve, the revenge simmering beneath the surface now intertwined with a quest for truth that threatened to upend everything. With the holiday clock ticking inexorably forward and the envelope's secrets hovering just out of reach, I tucked the phone away, the witty misdirections of gifts feeling like child's play. Compared to the confrontation looming, wondering if unraveling this final thread would bring closure or merely expose fractures too wide to mend. Leaving the air thick with the uncertainty of what Emily was so desperately guarding and whether my unyielding stance would ultimately free me or condemn us all to a silent, splintered Christmas. Christmas Eve unfolded with a crispness that belied the emotional frost settling deeper into my bones as the sun rose over a Seattle still dusted in remnants of the recent blizzard, casting long shadows across the snow-blanketed lawns and illuminating the neighborhood's festive displays that now seemed like distant echoes of joy rather than invitations to join in, because the barrage of begging messages had reached a feverish crescendo overnight, transforming my phone into a relentless conduit of desperation from a family unraveling at the seams while I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by the soft glow of a tree adorned with ornaments that carried the weight of shared histories now fractured beyond easy repair. The voicemails piled up like unwanted gifts under the branches, Emily's voice breaking as she vowed to abandon the Hawaii plans altogether if only I'd agree to a simple conversation that could bridge the chasm she'd helped widen. Tom's more measured pleas laced with offers to reimburse every cent skimmed from the family pot through his dealership indiscretions, and even a group video from Mom and Dad captured in their dimly lit living room with the half-decorated tree looming behind them like a sentinel of unresolved tensions. Their faces streaked with tears as they recounted how much they missed the daughter who'd always been the steady anchor in their stormy lives, pulling at heartstrings I'd long fortified against such manipulations yet found themselves straining under the holidays' relentless pull toward reconciliation. That image of them, so vulnerable amid the twinkling lights and scattered wrapping paper, stirred unwelcome memories of childhood eves spent ripping into presents with unbridled excitement. The air filled with laughter and the scent of Mom's gingerbread cookies baking in the oven. But the envelope photo from the unknown sender overshadowed it all, its blurred contents whispering of deeper betrayals tied to Dad's will that had prompted the exclusion from paradise, not as a mere oversight, but as a strategic maneuver to sideline me from decisions about our shared future. I'd spent the sleepless hours before dawn poring over online resources about estate planning in Washington state, cross-referencing details with the faint glimpses visible in the image, and pieced together that Dad's health scare the previous year, a prostate issue he'd brushed off during our last awkward family dinner as nothing more than routine checkups, had spurred the will's revision, ostensibly to safeguard assets for the grandchildren Emily perpetually promised, but never delivered, though. The timing aligned too neatly with her escalating debts and Tom's shady dealings to feel coincidental, fueling a resolve to confront the full truth rather than let their pleas dissolve my hard-won boundaries into seasonal sentimentality. Determined to end the cycle of half-truths and indirect assaults on my doorstep, I composed an invitation for them all to gather at my house under the pretense of clearing the air one final time. A calculated olive branch that masked my intent to lay bare the secrets festering beneath the holiday veneer, and as the afternoon waned into early evening with the sky bruising into twilight hues, they arrived in a somber procession that filled my driveway like an awkward tableau from a family therapy session gone awry, Mom clutching her signature fruitcake wrapped in festive foil that carried the faint aroma of rum and raisins, Dad shuffling forward with his hands jammed deep in his coat pockets and eyes downcast in a mix of apprehension and resignation. Emily and Tom looking disheveled from nights in budget motels since the eviction, their faces etched with the exhaustion of a road trip marked by arguments and second-guessing every choice that had led to this precipice. The air inside thickened immediately with forced pleasantries and the underlying tension humming like an untuned guitar string, everyone avoiding the elephant in the room until I shattered the fragile piece by holding up my phone with the envelope photo magnified on the screen. Its postmark from the estate attorney glaring like an accusation as I demanded Dad explain what this was and why it had been weaponized to justify cutting me from the Hawaii trip without a shred of honesty. His complexion drained to a ghostly pallor under the warm lamplight, confirming the accuracy of my suspicions in that instant, and the unraveling commenced in halting bursts of confession that peeled back layers of deceit I'd only glimpsed before, revealing that the will had originally divided assets evenly between Emily and me to honor the equal footing Mom and Dad always preached in theory if not practice, but Emily had swayed them into an amendment during Dad's recovery, citing my post-divorce instability as a risk factor that necessitated funneling a larger share her way to support the future family she'd fabricated through tales of fertility struggles and marital devotion, all while the Hawaii exclusion served as a diversionary tactic to keep me occupied and oblivious during the legal tweaks. Tom's role emerged in stark relief as the catalyst for the financial desperation. His firing not from mere incompetence, but from embezzling client deposits intended for a family trust fund that Emily had then covered by amplifying her sob stories to our parents, turning their enabling love into unwitting complicity in a scheme that prioritized her comfort over familial equity, and the room erupted into a cacophony of denials and sobs, Emily wailing that it was all for survival amid miscarriages. She'd concealed to spare us worry, Tom edging toward the door with the furtive glances of a man cornered by his own greed, while Mom clung to Dad's arm like a lifeline unraveling thread by thread. The emotional torrent crashed over me in waves of vindication mingled with a hollow ache, because their betrayal transcended the vacation snub into a profound erosion of trust that had me questioning every holiday memory we'd built on foundations now revealed as cracked and uneven. Yet in that maelstrom, I summoned the final thread of my revenge. Pulling from my desk drawer a printed copy of the will amendment I'd expedited from the attorney that morning through a discreet inquiry masked as general advice, reading aloud the damning clauses in a voice steady with the authority of someone who'd rebuilt her life without their safety net, highlighting the equal shares provision and the fraud penalties that loomed over Tom's actions like a holiday Scrooge's ledger. To seal the clever, cutting closure, I unveiled a drafted family statement intended for our interconnected social circles in Seattle's tight-knit professional and neighborhood networks, worded with elegant ambiguity to preserve a veneer of dignity while exposing the favoritism's underbelly. This holiday season has taught that true family bonds thrive on honesty rather than hidden agendas. Here's to peace and accountability in the year ahead. A public declaration that would ripple outward without naming culprits, turning their private manipulations into communal whispers of accountability that no amount of begging could silence. They pleaded with renewed fervor then, dropping to their knees in a scene that blurred the line between genuine remorse and performative desperation, Emily sobbing about the lost chances for the family she'd dreamed of, Tom murmuring vows of starting fresh with legitimate work, and my parents invoking decades of sacrifices from mill shifts to scrape together college funds, their words weaving a tapestry of regret that tugged at the remnants of my compassion, making me confront the human cost of my unyielding revenges and wonder if this path of isolation was the true price of empowerment, or merely a self-imposed exile from the flawed but familiar warmth of blood ties. As they filed out into the gathering dusk with snowflakes beginning to dance once more under the streetlights, their coats dusted in fresh white and footsteps crunching on the path leading away from my door, I closed it with a firmness that echoed through the empty house. Whispering too late to the silence that followed, the ornaments on the tree continuing their solitary twinkle as if indifferent to the magic shattered beyond repair, replaced by a quiet strength born from truths unearthed and boundaries etched in stone. Yet just as I composed myself to post the statement from my laptop in the fireside glow, a final text from Aunt Linda illuminated the screen with unexpected urgency. The full story's out now, but there's one more clause in the will you haven't seen. Something about contingencies that could change everything. Call me after the holidays when the dust settles, a tantalizing hint that dangled unresolved possibilities amid the finality I'd imposed, leaving me to sit in the radiant hush wondering if closure was ever truly attainable or if the fractures I'd exposed would heal into something stronger, or widen into permanent divides that doomed us to parallel lives brushing past each other like strangers at future family funerals. With the family dispersed into the night and the Hawaii dream faded into irrelevance, the weight of unanswered questions lingered, prompting a deeper reflection on forgiveness's elusive nature. Could I ever reopen that door without inviting more chaos? Or had this Christmas marked the irrevocable end of our tangled saga, a thought-provoking void where empathy and resentment danced in eternal ambiguity?